Hello, everyone. It is time to head north. Of course, this is our podcast for the North Group. I'm Natasha Ryan. I'm the VP of Communications and Business Development. I have Vince Rocco Vargas here, my counterpart in the business development realm. And of course, you might recognize his handsome face from the show, Mayans MC. Today, we are chatting with Liz Frank from Hostage US. Liz, so great to have you. Thank you so much. I actually randomly got introduced to your organization on a LinkedIn feed and just had to know more. So why don't we start off with a little bit of background about who you are and what the organization is and how you got started.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Natasha. It's really good to be here, and I appreciate the opportunity to chat with you both. So I am the executive director of an NGO called Hostage US. And just as a brief background, what we do is we support families of Americans who are wrongfully detained or held hostage abroad, and we support them back to life when they get home. So there's kind of two elements of it. It's one element of supporting the family when they have a loved one being held, and then that person, once they're released and get back home, we help them to rebuild their lives. So I guess just backing up a little bit, I'm going to talk a little bit about the need, because I think it's important to put a context around why we're here and why people should be interested in the issue in general. And that is in part because, it's Americans being held wrongfully abroad, which is, I think, a bipartisan issue everyone can get behind. But the reality is there's at any given time upwards of about 100 folks who are wrongfully held abroad. And that is a number that is kind of continuing to increase, especially with wrongful detentions in the US. So every year we estimate there's around 200 of these cases because folks are taken and released. But there are really, really long-term cases, of course, cases that you've heard of, Austin Tice, many others who have been released this past year. And then there's cases that are not in the media. So the numbers that you might see in this news and the media and press and stories that you hear about releases, you have to remember that there's many, many more that aren't broken in the media. And that's for, safety reasons and things like that. So we launched in 2016, and it was a direct result of then President Obama's hostage policy review in 2015. So there's a series of Americans who were murdered in 2014. Obama then ordered a hostage policy review to essentially assess what we're doing in the US government about hostage recovery, hostage planning, and then just making sure that in general, the government is supporting American families the best that they can. So from that review, it was apparent that there was a gap in support for families. And we're talking emotional, practical, professional services, the support that the government isn't necessarily set up to do, and certainly better so now than they were in 2015. But their goal is to get the person home. But there's a lot of other things that go along with that. And that's a suffering family, a suffering community, and things like that. So we started out and continue on as that support side of things, the NGO folks who are there to make sure that the family makes it through and that the former hostage gets back on their feet when they return home.
When I first spoke with you, Liz, there were so many things that just blew my mind that I had never thought about, right? Like, you talked about how the breadwinner of the family gets plucked out of nowhere and just disappears. And now the practical side of it, let alone like your loved one has been taken, right? Like, set emotions aside, like the actual monetary constraints that are now put on that family. I want you to speak to that, because I don't think anyone thinks about that. And like, it's just another hardship that's thrown on top of the emotional one, right? Like, that's a lot to bear.
Yeah, you're exactly right. It's one of those situations where you don't have any need to think about it until you have to. And then you're thrown into this, vortex of things happening and trying to keep up with regular life. So oftentimes when somebody is taken, like you said, either it's the breadwinner or maybe it's not, but there will be a changed income for the family, right? Naturally, if that person is is working and they're taken. Unfortunately, and this is a surprise to many people, but unfortunately, most organizations won't continue a salary, even if the person was there on work and taken, on work. There's companies that do, and bless them, because that's a huge ask, but it's really their kind of duty of care to do so. But many organizations can't or just won't continue the salary. So the family is faced with, paying lawyers, paying response organizations, paying media consultants for managing the case, yet they have this massive change in income that they have to live on. So as you can imagine, their quality of life is very, very different. So they find themselves, once they kind of get past the shock of having someone taken, they find themselves with serious and massive financial challenges. So, one of them is literally just paying the bills. Another, for wrongful detention cases, is oftentimes families will hire a lawyer in the country that they're being held, so that they have somebody on the ground kind of being able to visit the prison or bring the prisoner some money and things like that. And, finding a suitable lawyer in country is really expensive. And then paying them every time that they visit your loved one and things like that. So these expenses are kind of astronomical for any just kind of regular family going through this. Yeah.
Sorry, Liz, I have this crazy, I knew what we were going to talk about, but then when you started talking more, it got me excited because I have a friend who was detained in Pakistan, and he was detained for 3 years. And there's a documentary on it. It's the Eric Audet story. He worked with me in television. He's a stuntman now, but he had this thriving career as a teen actor. He was really coming up, and then in between trying to make money, he was persuaded by a gentleman saying to transport leather goods across the country. And he was doing it for good money because as an actor, sometimes we're not working. And when doing that, after the second time, he was arrested, and as a drug smuggler, didn't know that the lining of the suitcase was heroin, and ended up doing 3 years in prison. And he was on pretty much a death sentence. They were going to kill him until this story is just tragic because he had to fight so hard to do that. And in that, he lost his whole acting career. He does stunts now. He's very successful in that. But he talked to me personally about how much he lost in those 3 years in just credibility alone from people that just never believed he didn't know.
Right. Yeah, I'm really sorry to hear that story, and that it's something that happens, I think, all too often to Americans traveling abroad. And you're exactly right in the context of the 3 years. He was arrested and then fighting for his freedom for 3 years, but everything else was put on hold. So, like you said about the career aspect of it, that is incredibly challenging for people coming home. And if you think about it, if he then was building a career in Pakistan and couldn't go back there, or, didn't feel comfortable to go back there, then you're right. He starts from scratch. Right. And that's what we see with, aid workers who are taken in a certain country that they feel really passionately about, that they're supporting, and they're working there for many, many years. And then they get taken hostage. Well, when they're released, obviously very good news, but for their livelihood, for their passion, it's bad news, because now, they're not going to go back to the place they were taken hostage and now have to restart their lives. So, it's the same with contractors or journalists or aid workers or kind of anyone. It's just like you get home, and that's a good thing, but then it's like, what next? And so that's a really big part of our work, is helping folks figure out what could be next, getting their physical, mental health back in order so that they can have a next, that type of thing. And it's that part is something we call surviving survival. And it's getting back to actually, figuring out what that next stage of your life is and trying to survive that part after all of the, high fives and hugs of getting home. It's what next?
Yeah, I can imagine that's exactly the next step of trying to figure out life all over again. Are you guys actively working all over the world? Like, you guys are a resource for anywhere in the world, from Mexico to Middle East, everywhere?
Yeah, it's a good question. So Hostage US is our mandates actually very specifically for Americans who are held abroad, but we have a sister organization, Hostage International, who manages, cases of all other nationalities. And we did that very purposefully, of course. Unfortunately, that a lot of Americans are being held, and it was enough so that it was needed to have its own organization set up here in the US to be able to handle those cases. And Hostage International does everything that we do just for kind of other nationalities.
I want to talk a little bit about perception and reality. So I think, when people, this was another revelation I had when we talked. So when people think about hostage situations, they think, oh, the military is going to get involved. They're going to go, they're going to rescue them with special forces, and they're going to bring them home. And it's going to be like, as soon as they find out, they're going to go in and get them. It's way more laborious than that, right? Because the government's pace is slower than most people realize. And then what you said to me that I did not know is it's ultimately the family's choice on whether the military moves in and does that op. And there are reasons sometimes that that's seemingly not a good idea. Can you talk a little bit to all of that for me?
Yeah. And to I guess to clarify the family's option or the family's choice bit of it is that most of the time the family will get the okay. There's been, I think, a couple times where the family's okay wasn't received because it was a move or don't move situation, and there was a call that was made, which is fair enough. I'm not a military person, but can certainly understand the need to move quickly. So rescue operations, as you and probably many of your listeners can imagine and understand, that they're incredibly dangerous, right? Not only for the operators themselves, the military themselves, but also for the person being rescued. Oftentimes they're being held in a place that, the military will have intel, of course, on where it is, but the surroundings, the exact location of where the person's being held might be a little iffy, that type of thing. Not to mention you're being likely guarded by armed guards and things like that. So it is really quite a risky method of getting someone home. And it's not even always possible because oftentimes hostages are sold to different groups. They're moved about quite often so that people don't know where they are. It's a business to keep someone rather than to allow their home country to know where they are. So it is, it's a risky option to rescue, but that, it's been successful oftentimes, and it's unfortunately been unsuccessful in other cases. And that's incredibly difficult for obviously the family to make that okay. And, say that's something that we'd be open to and something that we would want. The other options, of course, for hostage cases, let's take kind of wrongful detention cases off the table in this conversation. But the other options for getting home, of course, are escape, which some do. And that's, you have to be incredibly willing to take a risk, and obviously it's can be incredibly challenging in certain circumstances to even attempt that. So it can be a military rescue, it can be an escape. Oftentimes hostage cases are not dealt with in diplomatic ways, or at least resolved in diplomatic ways, but sometimes we've heard of that type of kind of humanitarian release. And so there's not so many options on the table for you as a hostage. And the U.S. government doesn't offer concessions to terrorist groups. And, that has been, I think, made very, very clear over the past couple of years. However, in the 2015 policy review, it was, understood that we as the U.S. government would come to the table at least to hear from the hostage takers their demands, and not offer concessions, but certainly hear what they are asking for. And it's been ransom payments in general have been a point of contention in this issue. And certainly Hostage US does not have a stance on ransom payments. And it is very much up to a family to decide if that is the route they want to go. However, the U.S. government used to, threaten legal action against families who would like to or did even raise ransom and pay for the release of their loved one. And after their policy review, it was Obama, verbally said, we're not going to press charges against families or individuals for doing so, because as humans, we can all understand fighting for, your family kind of no matter what, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. The undertaking of a hostage rescue from the tactical standpoint of my background is that's a stressful one. And so, Natasha, when you ask that question, is like the families need to know that there's potential for collateral damage, and sometimes collateral damage is a loss of life. That
yeah,
and that is heavy. So what an awesome organization that I had no idea even existed, to be honest. And I think it's important because so I was a Homeland Security. I was part of Border Patrol for 7 years as well. And there is Americans getting kidnapped to Mexico from time to time, and I've been on some of those calls for assistance, and had no idea that Hostage US was an organization that we could use as a resource. And so I'm grateful that I know this now, and I'll be keeping that in my back pocket.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, I think one of the challenges of getting out there is, this is just being, frank. It's a low incidence of the crime compared to other crimes that we see and hear about in the U.S. naturally, but it is one that it's so massively impactful for the person, the family, and the community. It's just really kind of earth-shattering experience that it is different than other crimes in that it goes on for weeks, months, years, and then there is that period of kind of rebuilding everything that you have lost during that time. And I'll say also, it's not just the family or the hostage themselves also, but think about their coworkers and their employees who are then placed into similar countries or postings and things like that. So it really does kind of have this ripple effect of trauma or secondary trauma for not only the person who was held, but the family, the community, and that type of thing.
I think about how, you have a very small staff to run this organization. And I think about how just handling the financial side of this, you could have a whole company, let alone having to then also, which I'm sure you do, have to be an emotional support for people, because it must be so defeating to want to turn to get help and you don't know who to go to, because there's really, it's not like just calling the police, so like you have to do all of these jobs. That's gotta weigh on you sometimes.
Yeah, that's really important and interesting. And thank you for bringing that point up. So one of the things that we do for our people is we try to obviously provide peer support. So we have a team, and I'll get into kind of how we work actually, because I think that piece is really interesting and kind of walk you through a case or two. But we do take the secondary or vicarious trauma, it's called. So when you're supporting someone who's going through a trauma, it's, very, very common for you to become quite close with them and to understand a bit more intimately, their lives and become kind of part of their trauma almost, right? So it's very common that you might take that on and start to
absorb it. Yeah,
exactly. So any kind of break in the case, it's like you're seeing the news alert just as quickly as the family is. You're on with the family trying to support them, yet you're actually kind of trying to process it as well. So we do have things in place, and we do an annual mental health assessment for our team where we just talk to GW University Hospital does it in DC, and they have folks who can help us kind of work through any challenging cases and things like that. And then we, like I said, we do peer peer case kind of review calls. So it's similar to a social work structure in that we have this, peer support system set up over cases and with each other. But let me walk you through a case. So
Yeah.
I think kind of to your point, Natasha, it's hard to conceptualize, I think, what Hostage US does or can do. And I think it's even hard for families who reach out to us to conceptualize that, because it is incredibly different depending on what case we're working on. So I'm going to start with the fact that we support hostage cases and wrongful detention cases. So hostage case is your typical kind of what we've been talking more so about, held by a hostage or held by a terrorist or a criminal group, right? So those are folks who are being held by rogue actors who are asking for a concession from your family, from the government, etc. Wrongful detention cases are, the folks who are held by state actors. So think Venezuela, think Russia, Iran, China, and kind of a handful of other countries that we work with. So when we're introduced to a case, we can be introduced at any point, but let's talk when we're kind of introduced before a case really kind of gets going. So sometimes folks who don't hear from their loved ones are Google searching, hostage and that type of term, and find us and give us a call. And the first step, of course, is that we would refer them to their FBI field agent, so that they would be in contact with either the FBI or the embassy in the country that the person's being held. And that's, our kind of standing line is to suggest that if they have no operational support yet, that they do indeed get in touch with the government. If they have, if they're with a company and they do have a kidnap and insurance ransom policy, and that policy is then, covered by a crisis response company, the crisis response company is likely already involved and kind of working the case from that side. So when we get, introduced to a family and we kind of know that their response side of things is in place and they're getting those pieces in order, we then kind of help them to assess what it might look like. So what we do is kind of get a rundown of everything that they've been dealing with in the first couple of days. The first couple weeks are going to be a lot of emotional support from us. So a lot of expectation setting, kind of talking to families about considering, this might be a longer term case than we'd like, which is, any minute longer is a longer term case than we'd like, but, just trying to help families think through what they might need to face in the coming weeks and months. And oftentimes, depending on, the type of kidnapping or wrongful detention, you might have some case studies to look at, right, to understand how long it might be or that type of thing. So we help to kind of get the family emotionally, at least, supported well enough in those first couple of days and weeks. Then we start helping families.
Liz, you're muted. There we go.
So Natasha, some of the things we had talked about before, like, either they get a lawyer in country or they might need to start paying some bills. So some of the other financial things that we approach actually in those first couple weeks are just thinking through any bank accounts that the person has opened. Maybe we're in February or March or April, and they might have a tax filing due at the end of April. So starting to think through these things that might impact when they come home, how difficult it is to reintegrate. So oftentimes, if people are held for multiple years and haven't filed taxes, they'll return home with, fines and interest and all these things that are incredibly difficult to take off your IRS account or to waive. Just any issue with the IRS is annoying to begin with. And imagine being, not filing for years and coming home and trying to figure that out. So there's a guy called Jason Razion who's wonderful. He was held in Iran for about 18 months, and he came home and had, because of the time period that he was gone, even though it was less than 2 years, but it was 3 years of filings that he had missed, and he came home to thousands of dollars of fines. And it took him and I years, and actually talking to the National Security Advisor, to even remotely get that fixed. We never got it entirely fixed, but we got to a point where it was thankfully much, much, much lower than it was when he returned. So we get families to start thinking about these types of things, so that, when the person does come home, it is a little bit of an easier reintegration process. So it's the IRS, it's any bills. So if the person has rent that's, automatically deducted from their account, or just not being paid, that can ruin their credit when they come home. So they need to start talking to, the landlords of these places that the hostage rents and things like that, to make sure that the bills aren't outstanding, or that they don't have, any nicks on their credit when they come home. So that's kind of early stages. And then as we get into the next period of time, if we're talking a longer term case, sometimes power of attorney issues start to become very prevalent and challenging. So, for instance, if a spouse wants to sell their house, or sell some assets because they need more money to continue paying for the case, oftentimes if there is a spouse, then the house will be in both names, or the assets will be in both names, and it's not possible to sell. So, these power of attorney issues can be really, really challenging for families who are just trying to kind of continue their normal day-to-day life and figure out, how they're going to get the finances to do that. So we're oftentimes working with real estate lawyers, or, lawyers who can help create conservatorships or receiverships, which would be kind of the alternative avenue to a power of attorney. If there's not one in place, which I can say pretty much across the board is the case, unfortunately. Just because as Americans, we don't travel thinking the worst case scenario. Not many of us will consider putting a power of attorney in place for any sort of trip. So, the likelihood of the families that we support having those in place are very low, unfortunately.
Well, you can bet if I travel overseas now, I will. I never thought of that. I mean, you don't think of that kind of thing.
No, never have.
Sorry, I can't hear you guys.
Huh. Well, you're not muted on our end. Let's see. We can hear you.
You can hear us. You can hear me.
Yeah.
You can hear me.
Okay. You can't hear us? Did your Bluetooth on your headsets turn on?
I can't hear you. Hold on. Let me try putting these in.
I think the Bluetooth on those turned on.
Got it. Can you hear me?
Okay. Yeah, we're good.
Yeah. Can you hear us?
Yes. Sorry about that.
So I want to ask, how can we, anyone watching, you and I had the conversation, right? TNG is a risk mitigation firm. We can help out in all sorts of intelligent aspects and all of that. But pro bono, everything is donated to you guys for the most part, because it has to be. So if people are watching and they're in the security sector, how can people help? Essentially, I guess is my question.
I love that question. It's my favorite question. So we have, it is a unique organization in that, like you said, Natasha, we do have a very, very small staff, and we rely very heavily on volunteers, and we have kind of different areas of volunteers. And because we're non-operational, having groups like the North Group be able to be that kind of operational option for families, that referral process can be really a nice help to fill in where we stop. But in terms of the Hostage US support, so we actually operate through a group of what we call support coordinators to actually deliver the services. So it's myself and my colleague Winnie on staff, and she oversees the family support program. And under kind of her purview is our support coordinator team. And these are all folks who have, in some way been touched by the issue, whether personally or professionally or, otherwise, just been interested in what we do because of, either personal or professional reason. And they oftentimes have full-time jobs, and we recognize that. So we kind of keep folks' case levels or numbers quite low, but they will volunteer with us, and what they'll do is essentially be connected to a family and be that caseworker for that particular family. And they walk, they walk beside them pretty much from day one until when the person comes home. And when the person comes home, as I've said before, then we pick up right where they need support and offer support to that person. So these are, professionals from security background, military, folks who are spouses or, sons, daughters of former hostages, or just folks who have some sort of mental health background who are interested in kind of this work. And these, we have about 15 of our team members right now. And we go through fairly regular training sessions with Winnie and I, and we do intro training all the way through to really specific topic specific training on certain aspects of family support and how you might be there for a hostage or wrongful detainee family through the case. So we have those support coordinator folks, and we have a bucket of financial advisory advisors who work directly with families on those financial issues. And so half of them are financial advisors and the others are CPAs. And those kind of two ideas work really nicely together so that families can have, the full picture of their finances and then really specific help with tax and accounting issues. We have law firms on our strategic partner list, and those will offer pro bono help for any of those legal issues that we were talking about. And then mental health advisors. And from there, we have individuals who have really specific expertise who are just kind of connected to the organization. So, we have folks from think tanks who can help connect us with location specific experts. So if, someone's taken by the Houthis in Yemen, then their family can be briefed really deeply and really detailed on exactly what that group is and, what this experience might be for that person who's being held, which can be a really helpful kind of scene setter for the family, to understand who the group is that's holding their loved one.
Well, I just want to say thank you for coming on. Vince, do you have any final thoughts or questions?
No, I think it's an awesome organization. I'm excited to know now, and definitely I know it's a resource. Here in Utah, we've had a few incidents where someone's gone over to Mexico and is being detained unfairly. And so those are cases that we're probably still going to be able to work, and we'll be able to get a hold of you guys for that. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Liz, thank you for your time. And of course, if you want to hear more about her organization, you can reach out to her directly on LinkedIn or us, the North Group. And of course, continue to visit all of our social media outlets, Spotify, iTunes, our website, tngdefense.com for more podcast episodes just like this one. So until the next one, thank you, Rocco. Thank you, Liz. Have a great day, everyone.